today, and I am the fun one. I am so excited, especially this is our inaugural event for our Brain Health Initiative, and it's just, I can't tell you how I feel to have had the opportunity here at Pegasus to implement research that has really been present throughout my career. This is 30 years of work, and it's something that since I very first started in medicine, that I have wanted to implement. And Pegasus has given me the opportunity to share what I have learned through my career with those who live at Pegasus and hopefully beyond Pegasus, because we want to help everyone who has issues with cognition. And we want, with this Brain Health Initiative, for those of us who are aging, as we all do every day, to retain those skills. And I think the research that we're going to talk about today and the initiatives that we are rolling out with Pegasus will show you that we found what we call a secret sauce to keeping your brain healthy. And so I'm going to share that with you today. So whether or not you're in a situation where you are aging and are challenged with cognition, or you're young and healthy and want to stay that way as you age, these principles are important. So it's something that we as a company are initiating in 2025 as our Brain Health Initiative, and sharing that not only with us in our connections area, but also those in our independent, our assisted living, and with our staff, hopefully, and then beyond. We want to be a resource not only within Pegasus, but also within the communities that we serve. We want to be viewed as the experts. Obviously, we've been able to, over the years, find cures for many, many diseases. I think about measles, we think about polio, but the one that we haven't been able to address yet are the neurocognitive diseases that progress, like Alzheimer's disease. We have not found that cure yet. I think we're close. We're seeing some things with genetic medicine that I'm very excited about. We're seeing some immunosuppressive drugs that are being utilized. They're very expensive, but we are seeing some positives from those. But we want something that we know can help the masses. We know with neurocognitive diseases that typically they start 20 years before we see the actual disease present itself. So that brain cell death that is a part of neurocognitive decline starts in our 40s. It starts early in life. So if we can find a vaccine or perhaps a medication, if we can detect when someone is predisposed to this and treat them early, perhaps we can avoid that cognitive decline that happens when we're in our 60s, our 70s, and 80s. So we're going to talk about that, but we're going to talk about things that you can do right now, regardless of where you are cognitively, to keep your brain functioning and healthy. So pretty exciting stuff. I'm excited about it and excited to share with you our upcoming initiative here at Pegasus. Okay, so brain health is essential. If you think about your brain like it's a computer, the computer drives everything that happens in our bodies. So there is a very strong, we know now, a very strong connection between what happens in our brain and what happens in the rest of our body. So if we can keep this part of our body healthy, then we tend to do better overall. Even if we have other diseases like heart disease or diabetes, all of those things, if we focus on brain health, we know that we can prevent many of the exacerbations that come with heart disease, that come with lung disease, by eating healthy. We know also that our stomachs, or our gut, are lined, those intestines are lined with neurotransmitter. So if we have something going on in our brain, we also have something similar going on in the stomach. So we know that eating and keeping our stomachs healthy too are an important part of brain health. That's something we haven't really thought about much until the recent past, but we know that that's critical for brain health. The other thing that we want to do is to challenge our brain. Keisha talked a little bit about that earlier. If we want to keep our brain healthy, we challenge it on a daily basis. Decide to learn something new every day. I think back to my younger years, and my father always had a subscription to Reader's Digest. And in Reader's Digest, they had the word of the day. And you picked out a word and you learned that word. So we did that in our family. That's one thing you can do. Learn something new every day. Memorize something. The other thing that's very important to do to keep your brain functioning is to process. Work on that processing every day. So whether it's doing simple math problems, it doesn't matter if you get them right. I'm not real great at math either. It's okay if you don't get them right, but doing them. Reading aloud is one of the best things that you can do to keep your brain processing every day. So read a paragraph or two aloud every day in order to keep that language connection going. So those are some things that you can do. We'll talk more about this. So I wanted to talk a little bit. It's hard, as Scott said, I'm not always the fun one. So I'm going to give you some neuroscience lesson here really quickly, because you need to understand this about your brain in order to keep it healthy. One of the things that we don't always understand, or we may assume, is that our brain is going to wear out as we get older. Sometimes we just think, well, I'll get where I'm forgetful. That's, we call it having senior moments, right? That's not necessarily true. We know with normal brain aging that processing will slow a little bit, but your brain should still work the same, especially if you're challenging it every day like we're talking about. You can retain your cognition well into late age. I have, for example, I have a lady in my practice in Dallas who is 108. Now, she can't hear well, but her mind is sharp. But one thing she does every day is to read aloud, and she does math problems. That's kept her sharp all these years, and she's still very sharp at 108 years old, but she continually challenges her brain. Her eyesight is failing now, and she listens to books on tape throughout the day, but she's constantly challenging her brain. The other thing that is really critical part of this is socializing. Talk to people. There is nothing that challenges the brain more than the back and forth of conversation. So being part of a book club and being part of discussions is very important. So that's normal cognitive aging. Now, some people develop what's called mild cognitive impairment, and many of those go on living their lives, driving, living out in their own homes. We see that all the time, and there's a slight decline. These are the people that can benefit from challenging the brain on a daily basis, and we may even see some improvement. And then lastly, there is dementia. And dementia is an interesting term because it really talks about multiple diseases. We know at least 13 different types of dementia are present, at least that many. We mostly think about Alzheimer's disease because the diagnosis that about 60 to 80% of people get when they're diagnosed with dementia is Alzheimer's disease. And that's because there is a progression that we can kind of see that happens over time. And what happens, as I mentioned earlier, is that brain cell death occurs. So over time, those neural pathways that we've spent many, many years forming begin to die. And so initially there's very little impact, but after 20 years, from 45 to 65, we start to see functional impact, right? So we don't realize all this is happening, and that's one of the reasons I think too that dementia is so difficult to diagnose, because it is so insidious in its onset. It's usually one-offs. So we may forget an appointment, we may forget where we put things, and over time it becomes a pattern of dysfunction. that happens. So that's when we can really diagnose it, but that's at almost a moderate stage of the disease. So if we can diagnose that early and begin to work on it, work on function, then we can see an upside for treatment. Pegasus has, as I mentioned, allowed me to implement my research, and as in this slide, we talk about a holistic approach to mind-body health, and that's really what we're doing with this Brain Health Initiative, is really looking at the whole person. You know, we want to get to know who people are and what works best for them. Everybody in this room is a little bit different in what they like to do, what they like to eat, how they like to communicate with other people. We're all different. I enjoy getting texts. If somebody wants to communicate with me, I'd rather get a quick text so I can look at it anytime and respond to it, because I'm really busy during the day. Other people like face-to-face conversations or prefer to talk on the phone. So everybody's a little different, and so this Brain Health Initiative really focuses on that holistic approach that is focused on the individual, so very personalized. We also are looking at evidence-based programming. If you think about neuroplasticity as a whole, that's something that we've talked about a lot in medicine, and it's really been used in stroke rehab. I had the opportunity, and I'm going to call it an opportunity. I had a stroke when I was 54, and I'm 70 now. So 2 years ago, I had another stroke. And both times, neuroplasticity has brought me back to where I can function. You might not have guessed I've had a stroke, but it's because using neuroplastic concepts has assisted me to get back many of the things that I would have lost otherwise. And so my focus of my research was really about using these concepts that are often used for stroke for the person who has cognitive decline. If it works for stroke recovery and brain damage from that, why would it not work for people who have cognitive decline for another reason? So with neuroplasticity, through repetition of certain types of activities, by connecting with the emotion and then using cross-the-body activity, you can recover many of those faculties. And in researching that with people who have dementia, I found similarly that they respond to that. We can build new extension cords or new neural pathways around damaged parts of the brain to help people stay functional longer. We can't stop the disease now, but we can do things that will help them stay better longer. And so that's what we're after right now. And then hopefully at some point we have that cure that we can couple with these modalities that we're using with neuroplasticity to see overall improvement for people. And then lastly, we mentioned the personalized care. One of the things that we're really focusing on with the Brain Health Initiative is personalized care in our properties at Pegasus. We want very much to get to know each person. The thing with neuroplasticity, it's like anything, not every medicine works the same for everybody. And neuroplasticity is no different. In essence, it's like a process that is very like a medicine. If we do it consistently, we repeat it on a daily basis, just like we would give antihypertensive for blood pressure, then we can start to see positivity. However, it has to be very specific to that person. It has to resonate with that person. The neuroplastic process starts with engaging people emotionally. And so we have to know what makes them tick for that to work. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Okay. So let's talk about how memory works, and I think that will help you understand the neuroplastic process a little bit better. The important thing for any of us And it's just like with me standing here today, if you're interested in something that I'm saying, you're still engaged. We have these interesting filters in our brain. One of them is the reticular activating system, which allows us to decide what's interesting and what's not. Now we notice that the heat's kicked on or the air conditioner, I'm not sure which it is, but we don't really notice that until I call your attention to it. The reticular activating system in your brain filters out those ambient noises that aren't important, so they don't distract you. You can stay focused on the things that you need to complete your day because of that reticular activating system filter. Now, it also is in charge of whether you're interested in something or you're bored. That's what that does. So if I've not said something that's interesting and you've moved on to thinking about your day, then the reticular activating system has pushed the information I'm giving to the side and you're going to focus on something else. If you're interested though, the reticular activating system refers this to a second filter called the amygdala. That's the important filter in the brain. If I've said something to you today that's interesting or that you're passionate about, you've connected with that information emotionally and you're honed in on it. Your amygdala takes that information and will cause dopamine release in your brain so that you capture that memory and store it. So tonight when you go to sleep, the dopamine that has stamped that important memory from today, we'll put that away in a file. Later,
I'm gonna read out loud, I'm gonna do puzzles, it's all there.
You're gonna do it all. So later, when somebody says something that triggers that memory, dopamine hauls that out and says, yes, I heard somebody talk about that. That's how that works neurochemically. So it's similar to if I say to you, Thanksgiving. Where does your brain go? It immediately goes to those memories that you've had with family, of food, of smelling turkey and pumpkin pie, or all those things that you love at Thanksgiving. That's what it does. So that's what's happened, is those two filters have caused significant memory. You'll see the same thing sometimes with residents who may have difficulty with an activity like bathing. If we continue to do the same thing and they're negative about bathing, then we're reinforcing that. It's a significant memory, but it's not a good one. It's one that's negative. And you'll notice each time that the behavior will get worse and worse because we're reinforcing that extension cord to that bad memory. So we have to change things up in order to change that behavior. So significant memories are stamped that way. Let's talk a little bit also about brain pruning. Has anybody ever heard of that? Heard about pruning? Have you pruned a rose bush? Everybody's kind of pruned plants? Okay. It's similar to that. Your brain is very interesting because we've done many studies on how people learn, and what we find is that there are certain ages where it's better to learn a language or it's better to learn certain skills. Typically those who are very young are much more adept at learning other languages and can incorporate it right away with English, right? If we wait too late in life, it's harder. It's harder. If you've sat in a language class, as I did when I had my first stroke, it was really hard. I took Spanish, I knew a little bit of Spanish. I still know a little bit of Spanish, but it was very difficult for me conjugating the verbs in Spanish. My grandson, who is 10, speaks it fluently. He's Korean, or part Korean, but he speaks Spanish because he's had it in school, and he started very young, so he's very fluent. The difference being the pruning that occurs in our brain. So over time, if you think of the brain like an onion, if you think of little onion sets that you might plant in your garden, the brain is kind of like that because it's very instinctual. What does a baby do when it wants something? It cries, right? Its main purpose is to survive. So in order to survive, it cries when it's unhappy or needs something. So over time, as the onion grows, it layers itself with many layers of the cellulose, and pretty soon it's ready to cut and put on a hamburger, right? Pretty good stuff. Your brain is somewhat like that in that it develops over time different layers of complexity. So we're able to do more and more things over time. So as a baby grows up, hopefully, by the time you've reached this phase in life, you've quit crying when you want things. And you might still cry occasionally because you want something, but most of the time, we're gonna ask for it, right? That layer of complexity is there. When someone has dementia, those layers get peeled away. And so those layers of complexity over time are peeled away. And so we move more to just a survival mode by the end of the disease process. Pruning is somewhat like that. If there's an old adage that my grandmother used to say, if you don't use it, you lose it. And that's a part of this pruning process. So if we have that coupled with the decline of dementia or a neurocognitive process, then we can lose lots of those extension cords that we've spent years building over our lifetime. So in order to combat that, those two processes of pruning, not losing what we don't use, and avoiding the implications of neurocognitive decline from brain cell death, we have to use it. We have to challenge the brain. That's really what neuroplasticity is about, is avoiding this pruning process that is complicated when we have a neurocognitive disease like dementia. So we have to constantly be building those new extension cords to our memories. We have to. If you think about the brain and how it stores information, it has essentially two lobes. The left temporal lobe, which is language, so you can think language, left, and the right temporal lobe, which is the seat of emotion. This is what we feel. Now, people say, well, I'm not sure that's right. Let me explain how I know that this is the case. We know that language is stored in the left side of the brain, and we also know that dementia, especially Alzheimer's type, all dementias, but especially Alzheimer's, affects the language center because word finding is one of the first symptoms that we see, right? So as those cells die, the brain cell death occurs, then we can't, those extension cords that go to our language centers are constantly being cut. So more and more words are being taken away. And we're less likely to be able to get in touch with those words when we reach a moderate stage of the disease if we're not really challenging our brain every day with speaking aloud, with reading aloud, with doing math, those kinds of things, because that keeps us connected to that left side or language side of the brain. The right side of the brain is where rhythmic things or emotional things like music are housed. Most of us have our favorite song, right? If I were to ask you what's your favorite song, or even if you don't have a favorite song, you've probably learned your ABCs by singing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? Everybody knows that song. That's because it's housed here in the right side of the brain. That's one of the best ways to learn is through connecting emotionally with the information. So sometimes when people progress in dementia, we find that they will begin using words that we call here in Texas, we call cussing. And it's because cussing is a rhythmical thing, just like A, B, C, D. Cussing, when people get cussed out, it's rhythmical, right? It's da-da-da-da-da-da. And if you ever do that again, da-da-da-da-da-da. So it's here in the right side of the brain. So it's not uncommon to see people who progress with dementia who can't connect to those language files anymore to begin using bad language that's stored here in the right side of the brain. I've had many patients come to my office and
the family will say, well, my mother never used words like that. And now she's cussing like a sailor. What's wrong? Why is she doing that? And it's because, not because mom is cussing at them, it's because these language extension cords, if you will, that go to those files in the left side of the brain are cut off by brain cell death. And all she can get to are the right side or emotional, rhythmic things, which are cursing. She's not cursing, she's trying to communicate, but those extension cords on the left side to normal language are unplugged, they're broken. And so all she can do now is get these bad words that nobody wants to hear to try to tell you, hey, I'm hungry, hey, I need to go to the bathroom. But they're coming out as very bad words. But that's why that happens, because that's where we store those. And the way dementia progresses, it progresses from those language centers. The very last thing to be impacted is the emotional or right side of the brain, because we have that right up, really almost when people pass away, we can still connect with them through music, through touch, all of those things. So that kind of explains what we see as someone progresses in dementia, right? Okay. Now, neuroplasticity really is the secret sauce, I think, for dementia, because knowing what I've taught you today about neuroplasticity and about how the brain naturally prunes, we know a couple things, right? If we challenge the brain, if we connect emotionally, if we do all of these things on a consistent basis, we can offset some of that decline. And I have published a research article in the journal Alzheimer's Disease about this. We're going to be doing a presentation for the state of Texas here in just a few weeks about this as well. There's a lot of interest in neuroplasticity, and does it work with people who have neurocognitive decline? Right now we don't have a cure, so we have to find ways to mitigate what we're seeing occurring with dementia. What's so interesting to me is that dementias as a whole, that whole group of diseases, we find that they have one thing in common, and that is they break someone's perception. So the perception of the environment is broken, and the ability to respond to it is broken. The person is still in there. If you spend time talking with someone who has neurocognitive decline, and you hit upon something that's emotionally important to them, you'll find that that person is in there. I'll give you an example that I won't ever forget. It was a beautiful opportunity for me. I was talking with one of our residents who was a labor and delivery nurse. And she hadn't spoken much since she'd been in our community, but I began talking with her. I held her hands, I sat at her eye level, and I began talking to her about nursing and her career. And I asked her where she went to school. We just kind of started with very basic conversation. And by the end, she was telling me about delivering babies and how sometimes the doctors would leave her alone with these women in labor, and she would end up delivering the babies herself. And just, it was a beautiful conversation, and that interaction was so wonderful. She's still in there. And so connecting with her was critical. If we just think if we did that every day with her, would that improve her ability to speak, her ability to interact with other people? It probably would. But we found something that was passionate, and we connected. It was amazing. You may have seen the video, and if you haven't, I would encourage you to look at it, of Naomi Fail. She's I don't think she's alive anymore. I got the opportunity to study briefly with her. She's an amazing woman, but she got the whole concept of neuroplasticity. She worked with a lady every day who had severe dementia. She did not speak. And she would sit, hold her hands, and sing Amazing Grace with her. And the lady could respond to that. We knew she loved religion, that she loved singing. And so Naomi sat with this lady every day, and eventually this lady was able to mouth those words. It's a beautiful, beautiful YouTube of her doing this. If you haven't watched it, it's worth watching. But if you don't understand why, this is the secret sauce. It will show you why it is. So it's all about that connecting. That's what it's about. Connecting emotionally with somebody and then challenging them. Reestablishing that brain-body connection. So Keisha and team have worked diligently to bring this to life for us here at Pegasus. So they're really focused not only on the cognitive well-being, but also on physical well-being. And we're adding a new component to that, which, as we talked about earlier, is dietary well-being. We're not going to make everybody eat bean sprouts. If that's what you're thinking, that's not the point here. It's allowing for people to make choices and make healthy choices. So those are things that we want to work with our dietary services throughout Pegasus to begin to offer those healthy choices. So people do want to choose things that can be healthier choices for cognition. We can help with doing that. So, Keisha has been great at working on some specific things to challenge brains. We have our national initiatives like Spintopia that perhaps some of you have been part of. Memory jogging games, so doing the math, doing some of these things that we know challenge the brain and help us retain those skills. Art and music therapy, we have some really great initiatives coming up in the future. I know we've done drum circles. We want to do some things nationally as a team so that everybody that's in the Pegasus family gets a chance to participate on a regular basis. And then lastly, of course, our social events and outings. It's fine to do neuroplasticity in-house, but we want people to get out and see things. This should be a joyous time of life when we're celebrating life and celebrating new things. And so getting out of the community sometimes is a good way to do that. It's a good reset for people who are able to do that. So that's another thing that we're very focused on, is improving that aspect of our memory care programming and our connections area. Okay. So we talked a little bit about brain boosting foods. Here are 3. Now these are not limiting, but just some ideas. We know that basically adding anti-inflammatory and antioxidants to the diet can help. Fatty acids. One of the things that in our research that I've worked at UT Southwestern, we've worked on specific dietary initiatives, and what we found is that certain dietary practices, I guess you would say, are more conducive to limiting inflammation in the body, and that's what we want to try to integrate into our dietary practices here at Pegasus so that we can bring that inflammation down. There's been a lot of research around whether dementia or Alzheimer's may be a type 3 diabetes, and so we know there is a component of insulin usage in the brain that is a part of what goes on as far as cognitive aging. And the more inflammation we have in the brain, the less able we are to produce insulin, the less effective our brains will work.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, you may.
What's a fatty fish? Because I like catfish or snapper, but what is considered a fatty?
Salmon is a good choice. It's probably, I think, of all the fish, it has a lot of the omega-3 oils. They found that really including that diet, you can supplement with cold pressed oils like krill oils, any type of cold pressed fish oils. The heat processing changes how those function. So depending on how the capsules are made, you want to look for cold pressed oils. But but salmon is probably the best of those that you can get. It's a heavier, fattier fish. Good question then. Okay. And then, of course, personalized care we've talked about. The other thing that we have really focused on is specialized training for staff to make sure that we are training the staff so that they understand what we're talking about here. We've initiated our Connections Academy. Some of you in this room have attended those. So that and the expectation of those is that our folks who attend go back and train those individuals who are caring directly for our residents. And we put them hopefully in a position where they're able to mentor on these concepts and continue that daily reinforcement of our Connections programming. And then this is our Connections model. I'll show you it. This is the neuroplastic processing model. So basically it's here we're connecting emotionally. Then the second part of this that's really critical because it really involves all the movement that we do in life. One of the things we noted in our research is that as people progress in dementia, they begin to fall more. Some of that is due to depth perception issues that occur with the progression in dementia, but it's also because the synapses that connect those two temporal lobes of the brain are affected by brain cell death. So one of the things that you can do to offset that and to increase or mitigate the falls is to encourage cross-body exercise. So anything that crosses midline of the body, like dancing or sitting in a chair and doing exercise like this or reaching down, reaching across midline of the body helps reconnect the synapse. And that's really important for walking because as we walk, there's a left-right shift that occurs. You're going left, right, as our body moves side to side. That's the way our brains work. So if we can build stronger neural pathways left to right, then people don't fall as much. We saw a decided decrease or a significant decrease in the number of falls where these cross-body exercises were reinforced on a daily basis. And the more times a day you do that, the less falls you have. Pretty important to know, right? Very good. And then lastly, to reconnect. That's why getting to know people is so important and knowing who they are, because this really speaks to that personalization of what we do in Connections is this learn part. We want to make sure that we know who people are so we can connect with them at the level of their passion. What do they like to do? How do we connect emotionally with that individual to help them complete this process? We ask that our teams do these cycles at least twice a day to reinforce those neural pathways and to rebuild those neural pathways. You can think of it as building extension cords and reinforcing those extension cords every time you do these cycles. So you have to do it consistently in order for it to work. And remembering that the brain responds to challenge. So the more that we can do this on a consistent basis, this connect, move, learn, the more apt we are to have success. We had a gentleman at one of our properties who was nonverbal, had been for many years, and he went to reading club every day. Now he didn't read, but he's given a book every day, just like everybody else. One of our care partners would sit with him and point to the words. After about 6 weeks of doing this, it came to his turn, and he smiled. And the facilitator asked, "Do you want to read?" And I witnessed this, so it brought tears to my eyes. He was reading about M&Ms. He said, M&Ms are red, green, and blue. And he looked up and smiled at us. He was nonverbal years before this happened. And he didn't say anything for 6 weeks, but when it came his turn on that 6th week,
he was able to speak. But what we were doing by sitting him in the reading club every day consistently was a new neural pathway. So he heard that over and over, and it reconnected those language skills. It was like that when I had my stroke, when I was in my 50s. I could not speak as I'm speaking with you today. I could look at something, and I might be able to tell you what it was, and I might not. I could hold a hairbrush, and I would know it's a hairbrush, but I couldn't connect to the word for that object. But through challenging my brain, through conjugation of Spanish verbs, and trying to immerse in Spanish, it reconnected or built new extension cords around damaged areas of the brain, damage that occurred because of the stroke, and allowed me to reconnect with those language centers that had been there for years. They were still in there, it's just that the cords were broken because of the stroke. There was brain cell death, there was brain damage. So the brain, being the wonderful organ it is, can regenerate those neural cells or neural pathways, and that's exactly what happened. After 6 to 8 weeks of a Spanish immersion class, my English words began to come back. And I would say now I'm probably at 80 to 90% of my previous vocabulary. That's pretty good after a stroke. So I notice it when I'm tired that I don't do as well, but neuroplasticity worked for me. It also worked with me in the cross-body movement. I couldn't walk after my stroke. I was using a walker, and the brain specialist I was working with said, you need to get some cross-body movement. He said, that's important to be able to walk again, so you're gonna have to reconnect those broken synapses from the stroke. So he suggested ball and dancing for me. Now, no one wants to dance with me because I would step on their feet. The only person in my dance class who would dance with me was the instructor. That's how bad I was. But that act of moving back and forth, across the body movement, allowed me to eventually give up the walker. So it does work. And it works with our residents if we do it consistently. It's so important. So this is the secret sauce right here. I'm sharing it with you. Okay, next one. And here's our vision for the future. And I want to read this to you because I really put a lot of thought into this. We envision a future where senior living is not just about care, but about enriching lives, fostering independence, and promoting brain health. And I truly hope that you'll join me in this vision. I think, not just for Pegasus, but for everyone that suffers with cognitive decline or that wants to stay healthy. You want to keep your brain healthy, you want to keep your body healthy, and it starts with your brain. So I'm very excited that you've come for this, our inaugural Brain Health Initiative talk. And very excited to be here with you today, and I appreciate your attention so much. Thank you.
Thank you.